Hey there, bibliophiles and those raising bibliophiles. Without ratings and warning labels, knowing which books are appropriate for your children to read is like navigating wild terrain without a map and a compass. I don't know about you, but I have been burned more than once handing my child a book that I thought was clean and appropriate for them to read. I'm a fellow mom, educator, reading specialist, and literary enthusiast trying to find great books for my children and yours to read. So if you're looking for a real review from a mom with a biblical worldview, then welcome and enjoy this week's book review. So this week's book review is The Mythmakers, The Remarkable Fellowship of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien by John Hendrix. If you have followed me for a little while, I did his other book, Faithful Spy, not too long ago. So this is a wonderful telling of the influence and friendship of two literary legends. The story is told in a mix of imaginative retelling and factual accounts, weaved within a beautiful narrative with illustrations, graphic novel panels, and a traditional prose. Readers will not only be captivated by the story, but by Hendrix's creative style that utilizes the fantastical that is so beloved by Lewis and Tolkien. So I'm going to just show you just a couple of the images from the book from the inside. And so that gives you a cute little idea of some of the things that are included. I really love how just the way he really structured with the lion and the wizard. They're actually the narrators speaking to the readers and taking them through time and the scenes of Tolkien and Lewis's, their separate lives, but then together as they become intertwined due to their passion and their circumstances. An additional feature in is the use of portals in the story in which the reader can be transported to separate later sections in the book for additional information. And in there, you have some additional characters that are introduced as they're leading the readers sort of deeper and further into the story. So the first section of the story focuses on different myths and their influence, specifically on Tolkien, but also to an extent on Lewis as well. The ideas presented is that myths can ultimately speak to a deeper truth and a longing of the heart that points to the creator of all. And so they really wrestled early in their careers with these ideas of myth and fairy tale, as this was really not an established genre of writing. While there might have been a few, you have Lewis Carroll, they do make a reference to Frankenstein. A lot of what they were doing and this world building wasn't very common at the time, especially the idea of deep mythology. The Lord of the Rings was really J.R.R. Tolkien's like whole life work that he had started when he was very young. Lewis's atheism is also present in the first half of the book. So Hendrix shares how much of Lewis's disillusionment and struggle in life kind of came from his lack of faith and his opposition to it. He really, was able to debate and not argue in the sense of being angry with people, but to have those sort of discussions. He does refer to himself as the most reluctant convert. However, it is this struggle that does allow him ultimately to speak profoundly in a way to reach a wider audience with truth and theology. And so I think Hendrix does a great job of sort of introducing and laying the foundation for young readers to learn a little bit about Lewis in that regard. So then when they read later things by him, whether that's Mere Christianity, the Screw Tape Letters, they can sort of get a little bit more of that. The story does focus on his development of the Chronicle of Narnia, but that comes later in his life. So a majority of the story itself, though, is their sort of combined experience during World War One, and then the growing literary groups that they had over the course of their lifetime. So a lot of people might know of the Inklings, but there were some groups that came before that, and then that kind of trickled out. But there were still some meetings of it afterwards. Most of their life is really spent iron sharpening iron, especially in the Inkling group. Many of the members would be pushed and challenged each other. So while it focuses a lot on Lewis and Tolkien, because they're kind of the core of the group, they were challenged and pushed along by other people. According to Hendrix and sort of the research and what he presents in this book, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings might actually not have existed today had it not been for C.S. Lewis and his really great encouragement of Tolkien. Tolkien was extremely sensitive, easy to kind of become jealous, unsure of himself, very worrisome. He was worried about the way he was going to be perceived, how his stories would be taken, especially, being dear to his heart as a life work. Unfortunately, due to disagreements in philosophy and the idea of world building, as they were approaching the literary genre, Tolkien was actually not that encouraging of Lewis's Narnia series. And it was another man who actually ended up saving that manuscript and encouraged Lewis to really finish it. And without him doing that, we probably wouldn't have the Chronicles of Narnia today. The last section of the book itself really details the decline of their relationship, the slow breaking apart of sort of their fellowship. Much of it, unfortunately, is jealousy on Tolkien's part, sort of withholding of C.S. Lewis on his part and sharing his life. And a lot of that just comes from just disagreements that they had about life and faith. In the final pages, Hendrix does take a little literary license, and he really transforms our faithful narrators this whole time, who have been a lion and a wizard, into Lewis and Tolkien themselves, sort of in this final moment of reconciliation as they enjoy one last cup of tea. And so just some quotes from the book to kind of draw attention to. So just one quote kind of before Lewis becomes a convert, as he's sort of wrestling with these ideas of faith and myth and fantasy and imagination, where some of that comes along. Quote on page 81, Hendrix says, Tolkien's Catholic worldview did not discredit him as the skeptic Lewis might have expected. In fact, Jack could see a colleague whose work was not diminished by his belief in God, but rather relied upon it. And then Tolkien is quoted as saying on page 95, myth is invention about truth. And then on page 116 and like in other parts of the story, they talk about the fact that both of these authors, it wasn't so much this idea of creating, but this idea of discovery and curiosity. And so for Tolkien specifically, his creative work came more out of a position of discovery. And you can kind of think of an artist who might be sculpting something. I know that there's a lot of famous ones who have just talked about, they're waiting for the rock to sort of tell them what it's going to be. And so it's that same idea of discovery, trying to figure out what was going to happen, and letting it unfold. And Lewis, more so this idea that he had images and visions, and that's really his imagination that helped those stories again unfold and be discovered. And so I think that's a really wonderful way of just showing some of the creative processes that come from some of these great works of literature. Definitely anyone who's interested in learning about Lewis and Tolkien's friendship will greatly enjoy the story and the storytelling style. It really captures the imagination and it does justice to the subject itself. And so I very much enjoyed it. If you are looking for information about those two or a great book to kind of put before your children, I would definitely recommend this. So I hope that's helpful to you as a parent, and I hope that you will join me next week for another book review.